We're always told to be strong, to push through challenges. But what if real strength comes from embracing vulnerability? That's what we're diving into today.
It's so interesting how we think strength and stoicism are the same thing. But, pushing down emotions and pretending we're unbreakable can actually lead to burnout and exhaustion and even affect our physical health.
It's like we're carrying this weight of expectation to be on all the time. But if always striving for that perfect image of strength isn't working, then what is?
Well, the sources we've been looking at have this really intriguing idea, vulnerability. It's like a pathway to strength.
That seems a little counterintuitive. How does that work?
It's like building muscle. You have to break it down so it can build back stronger.
I think I'm starting to get it, but how does embracing vulnerability actually lead to resilience?
Let me give you an example. Think about the Japanese art of kintsugi. It's where they repair broken pottery using gold, highlighting the cracks instead of hiding them.
I see, so it's a bit like a metaphor.
Exactly. Our imperfections, our vulnerabilities, they all contribute to our beauty and our strength.
So it's about accepting those imperfections as a part of who we are, not something to be ashamed of.
Exactly. And acknowledging those vulnerabilities can be the first step towards growth.
But I can see why some people might hesitate. They might think that vulnerability means being weak or getting stuck in those negative emotions.
You're absolutely right. And the sources talk about that. Vulnerability isn't about wallowing. It's about acknowledging those feelings and then using them to move forward.
So how do you do that?
Well, there are a few strategies to try. First, try acknowledging the feeling without judging it. So instead of saying, I'm weak, you could try, I'm feeling overwhelmed.
Right, it's about shifting your perspective from judgment to observation.
Exactly. And then it's about creating a safe space to process those emotions. That might mean talking to someone you trust, a therapist, or even journaling or meditation.
It's about creating an environment where you can be authentic without fear of being judged.
Yes. And another key strategy is to take small steps. If you're feeling overwhelmed, just focus on small, manageable actions.
So you're basically breaking those big feelings down into smaller actions that feel more approachable.
Right. And finally, it's important to work on developing emotional agility.
What does that mean?
It's the ability to move between self-compassion and then problem solving.
So you're saying you acknowledge the tough feeling, you're
Yeah.
kind to yourself, and then you shift into thinking about solutions and moving forward.
Precisely.
I can see how this framework could be really valuable, but how do we know it actually works? Are there real-world examples of this connection between vulnerability and strength?
Oh, absolutely. There are some really fascinating examples that challenge the way we normally think about strength. One example from the materials talks about how, even in nature, flexibility and adaptation can sometimes be more advantageous than just pure strength. Think about plants bending in the wind so they don't break.
So there's wisdom in knowing when to yield, when to adapt to the pressures around you.
Exactly. And the sources also look at martial arts, specifically Aikido. That's where you actually use your opponent's force against them.
So it's about stepping back and maybe even letting go of control for a bit.
And they also talk about storytelling. Think about classic hero stories.
Yeah.
The main character often has to face these moments of weakness before they can be victorious.
So their vulnerability is a key part of what makes their story relatable and ultimately their triumph that much more impactful.
That's right. It makes them human. And the sources have this powerful quote that I think really sums it up well. They say, strength is not the absence of weakness. It's the ability to move forward despite it.
That's such a great quote. It really challenges our thinking. So after looking at all of these ideas, how do you personally define strength now?
For me, strength is about realizing it's okay to not be okay all the time. It's about knowing that asking for help and admitting when you're struggling are actually signs of strength.
That's such an important message, and I think it's one that we all need to hear.
We don't always have to project this image of unwavering strength. It's okay to embrace our vulnerabilities, to see them as part of being human, and to show up authentically.
That's a really powerful shift in perspective. It gives us permission to be more human, to be ourselves. And maybe, just maybe, in those cracks, we find a different kind of strength. A resilience that lets us connect more deeply, empathize more fully, and just navigate life with more authenticity.
It's amazing how embracing vulnerability can actually help us build stronger connections and live a more fulfilling life.
And speaking of connection, the sources we've been looking at emphasize that as a key part of resilience. It almost feels counterintuitive that showing vulnerability can make us more resilient, but I'm curious to know how that actually works.
Well, think about it. When we're facing challenges, we often try to deal with them alone, isolate ourselves. But having a support system, those people we can really trust and be open with, is crucial when we're navigating tough times.
So it's almost like vulnerability becomes a shared experience, something that creates a sense of solidarity, like we're all in this together.
Yeah, exactly. When we create that kind of space where people feel safe to be themselves and show their imperfections, it fosters deeper, more authentic connections. And it's not just about our own vulnerability either. Think about how it feels when we see someone else being vulnerable with us.
It makes us feel like it's okay to do the same. Like we don't always have to put on a brave face.
Right. It can break down those walls we build around ourselves, those walls of perfectionism, and it fosters a more compassionate and understanding environment.
So embracing vulnerability not only benefits us individually, but it also has this ripple effect, making the world a little bit kinder and more supportive.
It's like a chain reaction of empathy and connection.
We've been talking a lot about the emotional and psychological aspects of strength and vulnerability, but do the sources talk about any physical or biological connections?
They do, and this is where things get really interesting. Remember that example we talked about plants bending in the wind? Well, there's actually a whole field of study called biotensegrity that looks at how living organisms use tension and compression to create both strength and stability.
Biotensegrity. That's a new one for me.
It's basically the idea that strength isn't just about being rigid. It's about finding that balance between tension and flexibility.
So it's like having the strength to withstand pressure, but also the flexibility to adapt when you need to.
Exactly. And this principle applies to our bodies too. Think about how our muscles and bones work together. They create a system of tension and compression that allows for movement and adaptation. We're designed for both strength and flexibility.
It's incredible how this concept of strength through vulnerability shows up in so many different ways, from our emotions and our minds to our physical bodies and even in nature. It really challenges the way we traditionally think about what it means to be strong.
It definitely offers a more holistic perspective.
So how do we actually integrate this understanding of strength through vulnerability into our everyday lives? How can we put these concepts into practice?
It all starts with awareness. We need to start noticing those moments when we feel pressured to be strong, to push through without showing any vulnerability.
So instead of just reacting automatically, we pause and consider if there might be a different, more authentic way to approach the situation.
Exactly. We can ask ourselves, what would it look like to embrace vulnerability in this moment? What would it feel like to ask for help or admit that I'm struggling?
But I think it's important to remember that vulnerability doesn't mean we have to overshare or burden others with our problems.
You're right. It's about being selective, about choosing the right people and the right context to open up. It's about finding that balance between honesty and self-preservation.
It sounds like embracing vulnerability is an ongoing process, a journey of self-discovery and growth.
It absolutely is. And it's a journey that requires courage, honesty, and a willingness to challenge our own beliefs about what it means to be strong.
It's a journey that can lead to deeper connections, greater resilience, and a more fulfilling life. As we wrap up this part of our discussion, I have a question for you to ponder. Think about a time when you allowed yourself to be vulnerable. What did you learn from that experience? How did it ultimately make you stronger? Those moments when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, those are often the moments that lead to the most growth.
When we let people see us, really see us, imperfections and all, it can create a deep sense of trust and belonging.
And it helps us connect with others in a more genuine way, beyond all the masks we usually wear.
And in those moments, we also discover our own resilience. We learn how to navigate those tough times without losing sight of who we are.
So it's really not about weakness at all. It's about having the courage to be authentic.
It's about embracing the full spectrum of human experience, the good and the bad, the strengths and the vulnerabilities.
It's about letting go of that need to be perfect or to have it all figured out.
It's about finding the beauty in imperfection, finding strength in authenticity.
It's a powerful message, especially in a world that often tells us to hide our flaws and never let our guard down.
But it's in those vulnerable moments that we discover our true strength, our ability to connect with others, and really our shared humanity.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the paradox of strength, I want to leave you with one final thought. How can you use this idea of embracing vulnerability to help you overcome the challenges in your own life?
Think about what it would be like to step outside your comfort zone, to ask for help when you need it, to show up authentically in your relationships. Vulnerability isn't a one-time thing, it's a practice. It's about being self-aware, compassionate, and courageous. And the more we practice, the stronger and more resilient we become.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this conversation has encouraged you to see your own vulnerability as a source of strength and growth.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Deep Thoughts Podcast. I hope you found insights and inspiration to take with you on your journey of self-growth. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to follow us on social media to stay updated on new releases and exclusive content. See you next time, where we'll continue to help you grow and explore your full potential.